Hello, all. Welcome to Coffee, Crochet, and Unsolved Murder. My name is Stacy. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about unsolved murder while we crochet and drink our coffee. What else better is there to do, right? Drink coffee, crochet, and talk about unsolved murders. So let's get started, shall we? Does everybody have their coffee? Their crochet project? So I know in episode 1, I was working on a crochet project that I had just started, and I thought, let's see where it goes. Well, it's going into the whip pile, y'all, because I ended up liking it. I will end up doing something with it, but right now, I don't like it. So I started a new one. And for those of you who are new to crochet, a whip is a project that you just started and you put it aside because you decided you don't want to do it anymore. And I've got bags of whips. Okay? Bags. But let's hope I like this one better. It's longer. I like the color better. But you're not just here for that, are you? You're here to talk about unsolved murder. Well, let's get started, shall we? Welcome to episode 2, The Lava Lake Murders. And of course, I have my trusty notebook because that's how I do my research. And I don't write everything out. It kind of looks like I do, but I take notes. Lots of notes. So, you're going to learn about this case right along with me. And I like to do older unsolved cases because I would like to bring those stories to the here and now, because it doesn't matter. In the end, it's too late to get justice for the family, but we want to remember those people who lost their lives so unfortunately, so wrong that somebody got away with murder. And we shouldn't forget these people. And we're not going to forget these people, not one bit, because this is a strange story. So let's get started. Episode 2, The Lava Lake Murders. This takes place in December of 1923, at least through January of 1924. We are going to go further into 1924 because the case does go a little bit further, but winter is where the murders take place. So let's get started, shall we? This all happened in Deschutes National Forest. Again, I am going to be honest and say I am horrible with pronouncing names. So, I believe it's pronounced Deschutes National Forest. It is in Bend, Oregon. Okay? And so we're going into the Pacific Northwest into Oregon. This is the story of Edward Nichols, Roy Wilson, and Dewey Morris. 3 men who had decided to become fur trappers. And in that day and in that area, I believe they could make a pretty good living off of that, and just working, get through the winter, do trapping, sell the fur, and that could probably make them pretty, not going to say wealthy, but at least well off for the rest of the year. At least livable wages. So these 3 men, Edward, Roy, and Dewey, they lived in Bend, Oregon, and they decided to spend the winter at a log cabin and be fur trappers. So they rented this cabin from Edward Logan. He was a logging contractor in Oregon, and as planned, the men arrived in fall of 1923. to begin their journey. And everything seemed to be going well. A week before Christmas, December of 1923, Edward Nichols had went into using the sled. He had taken their sled and took the furs they had trapped and went into Bend and sold them. He was in a good mood. He told the locals that trapping was going very well. No problems whatsoever. Didn't let on that there was any problems. So this was a week before Christmas, and that would be the last time anybody in Bend saw any of the men, was the week before Christmas. Now January comes around of 1924. It's January 15th, a man named the man was named Alan Wilcoxon. And he was traveling by snowshoe. Yes, snowshoes, because 1924, winter, snow, you're not getting anywhere without snowshoes. He was traveling to Elk Lake, where he owned a resort. And he stopped at the cabin, spent the evening with the three men. I guess that's kind of what you would do if you're traveling, especially in a snowstorm. You come across a cabin, you want to get out of the weather, it's getting dark, so, three men, I'm sure that they let the man stay. So this was January 15th. He arrives at the cabin, a stopping point. He claims to have left on January 16th. He is the last person to see the men alive. Okay? Nobody at that point has seen them since, again, the week before Christmas. They didn't go into town to get supplies. They didn't go sell any more furs. And at that time, nobody's going to think about it because, maybe there's not a lot of animals. Maybe they haven't trapped enough to make the trip. Don't know. But then here comes April. April is, things are starting to thaw out. It's easier to get to the cabin. And let's bring in Ennis Morris, Dewey Morris's brother. He goes and he gets a hold of Pearl Lynn, who was the superintendent of Tumalo Fish Hatchery. So in April 1924, Pearl Lynn and Ennis Morris traveled to the cabin just to make sure everything's okay. Because, you haven't heard from anybody. Nobody's seen you. You're not selling furs. You're not going in to get supplies. We got to make sure that nothing has happened to anybody, right? So they arrive April 1924. The story goes that the traps that the men came across on their way to the cabin that did belong to the men had not been maintained. So, you're looking at this as their livelihood. They're not taking care of it. And that's very odd. That's very odd. They get to the cabin. They go inside the cabin. Nobody's there. They find burnt food on the stove and place settings for 3 at the table, but no sign of anybody. Still odd, getting concerned, more so than they were. So they go and start looking around the rest of the property. The sled that the men used to carry their equipment and their supplies, nowhere, they couldn't find it. It wasn't by the cabin. It wasn't where it should have been. Now let's go back to the property owner, Mr. Logan. Mr. Logan, who again was a logging contractor, he had his own pens set up where he had expensive foxes. Those foxes, apparently the men, I'm assuming, took care of them for Mr. Logan while they stayed in the cabin. Not sure the whole thing, but there had been very expensive foxes in this pen. pen's empty. Foxes are gone. In the corner of the pen, though, the men find a bloody claw hammer. On the traps, their trapping lines still had frozen remains on them, so they had not cleaned their trapping lines, which I'm assuming that when you're a trapper, you don't want that stuff on the lines because you're going to scare off any more prey that's coming up, right? Any more animals that you're trying to trap are not going to go near those traps if you've got remains of dead animals on it. Just so that goes. That's just my thought. At that point, the men decide to call the sheriff. So they get a hold of the sheriff. The next day, the sheriff comes out. Sheriff Clarence A. Adams. He goes out. He starts his investigation. He goes out. They find the sled. They do find the sled. Now, it was next to Big Lava Lake. Hence, the Lava Lake murders. So, they go out to the lake, find the sled, and on the sled were dark stains that they would later find that they were blood stains. So, there was blood stains on the sled. While they were searching, some of the searchers found a depression in the ice where it looked as if the ice had been cut and frozen back over. So a lot of you may have heard of ice fishing. People do go out, do cut holes in the ice and fish, and then they leave. Their fishing's done. They leave. Eventually, with the weather, that's gonna ice over again, but it's not going to match the other ice, if you get what I'm saying. So there's a depression at that point. They also found trails that they followed that led them to pools of blood. Now, of course, it's going to be frozen blood, dried blood. In April 1924, though, you are getting that the ice is melting. So the snow's melting, the ice is melting. So they're going to find, they're going to be able to get out to that area. They get a boat in the water, go out to where the impression was in the ice. And unfortunately, since the thawing of the ice caused the men's body to be able to float up. All three men's bodies were found in the lake. Bodies were taken to the medical examiner. The autopsies were done on all three men. And we're going to go down the autopsies, okay? So all three were shot, and all three had blunt force trauma with a hammer. Roy Wilson, who we didn't really hear a lot about. A lot of the people saw Edward, Dewey's brother, starts the whole search. Roy, you don't know what, there wasn't a whole lot about Roy. But Roy was shot in the right shoulder and the back of the head. 2 shots that they could find. Edward Nichols, his jawbone had been shattered by a shotgun blast, but then he had a bullet hole in his head from a revolver. Dewey Morris, he was shot in the left forearm, and he had a skull fracture from a hammer. Okay, so um, that's how they were murdered. So you got two different guns and then a claw hammer. Two different guns and a claw hammer. So let's keep that in mind. The police kind of thought that two of the men had been lured away from the cabin, and then subsequently murdered that way. They did have some suspects. So now that we've gone through so that's the autopsy. So you got two different guns. We know a revolver, we know a shotgun, and then you have a claw hammer. And we know that all three were at some point used on the men. Okay. And we don't know in what order. So let's go through the suspects, shall we? Suspect number 1, a man named Indian Erickson. He was a moonshiner and a woodsman. So he knew the woods. He had a camp at Cultus Lake, and that was near where the cabin was that the men were staying in. He did supply an alibi, though, so that he had an alibi. And let's talk about suspect number 2. And he was named Lee Collins. He also had an alias, and also known as Charles Kimsey. He was a fellow trapper, so he was a trapper. And they had witnesses that said he got into it. He argued with the men over a stolen wallet. I'm assuming that either the men said he stole their wallet or he said that the men stole his wallet. I'm not sure, but he did make threats to return and kill Edward Nichols. So he had an altercation. Again, I'm not sure if that was who did the accusing, who was the accusee, and who was the accuser. I don't know. I never found that out. I'm sure more people have information on this. I'm going off what I can find. In 1923, Kimsey had a record because in 1923 he was arrested for robbery and attempted murder in Bend. He tried to kill a man named W.O. Harrison, who was a stagecoach driver, by throwing him down a well. Now, Mr. Harrison survived. That's why it was attempted murder, because Mr. Harrison survived being thrown down the well. Kimsey fled before the case went to trial, so I'm assuming they didn't hold him. They were just going to have a trial, and he either, escaped or they didn't hold him, so he took off. On January 24th of 1924, Kimsey was located with a gunny sack and given the location of a fur dealer. And he sold furs for $110. Now at this point, the police had issued a $1,500 reward for his arrest and conviction in the Harrison attempted murder case. They wouldn't find this man for 9 years. And 9 years after the murders of the three men. He was found in Montana. So he had fled to Montana, was living there. So since 1924, the man had been on the run. So it took them 9 years to find him and get him back to Oregon. The case against him was circumstantial. And the fur dealer couldn't positively identify Kimsey as the man who sold the furs. But he did go to trial for the attempted murder on W.O. Harrison, where he was convicted and spent life in prison. But that was 1924. So 1924, 9 years. So in 1933, he was convicted of attempted murder of Mr. Harrison, spent the rest of his life in prison. The other three men, their case never went to trial. There was never any arrest made. And to this day, the murders of Edward Nichols, Roy Wilson, and Dewey Morris remain unsolved. And you gotta wonder if there was any forensic evidence that they kept from then, if it would still be viable. But then again, you're talking about the person who most likely did it is already dead. And if Kimsey was the one who murdered him, he did spend the rest of his life in prison, though it wasn't before the murder of the three men. It was for an attempted murder. Which, you know, let's think about that. These families had to live their life not knowing why or whatever happened. We can speculate that it was robbery. We can speculate that it was revenge. We can speculate a lot of things, but what we don't have is the actual proof. And unfortunately, probably never will. 13 years ago, an author by the name of Melanie Tupper published The Trapper Murders. Now, she suggests that Kimsey killed the three men with the help of Ray Jackson Van Buren from Sweet Home, Oregon. But Mr. Van Buren committed suicide in 1938. I would say that she's probably right that there were multiple people. And again, this is another book that I need to order so that I can bring you updates. So my other book has still not gotten here yet, but I am hopefully going to get that in the next week or so. Hopefully it'll get here soon. And that way I can go over the read and go over about what happened. This one I am also going to get so that I can find more information on it. And I will bring you updates for what she has come up with as soon as I read the book. Now, in thinking about the unsolved murders, you would think it would have to be, she's right, I would think that she's right about having to have multiple people, because you've got three men. I don't see how one man is going to overtake three men and murder them. Obviously, they used the sled to move the bodies to the water, because there was where the blood came from that was on the sled. It's just, you gotta wonder, were they murdered because they were doing so well? Were they murdered for the furs that they had? Did one of the men or two of the men catch them trying to catch Kimsey, and possibly this Van Buren person trying to steal the foxes that belonged to Mr. Logan, the owner of the property. And in all that, the two men overtook them one at a time. It's so hard to say, but that's why it's called Unsolved Murder. How are we doing on our crochet projects? Okay, well, mine's coming along. That was the Lava Lake Murders. So, hopefully you're enjoying Coffee, Crochet, and Unsolved Murder. It gives you 20 to 30 minutes of talking about a case and doing what you love to do. I hope you guys had an interesting experience with this case, and we will see you on the next episode of Coffee, Crochet, and Unsolved Murder.